BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
You're listening to Front Row with Stig Abel.
Tonight I'll be talking to pop synth duo and musical elder statesman the Pet Shop Boys and seeing how many of their song titles I can get into the script.
What have I done to deserve this? What have I done to deserve this?
You might well ask that. It's all right. The show tonight is all so good, it's a sin, really. No chance of being boring, I promise. But I've not been totally left to my own devices. There'll be opportunities for other items this evening, including a discussion of emotional risk in art. Do artists need to reveal their own traumas to be truly meaningful? First, last year, Faber published the words of Pet Shop Boys songs in a book called 100 Lyrics and One Poem, a sure sign of respectability and canonicity. The band have been always on our mind, I'll stop now, I promise, since 1985, in which time they've sold more than 100 million records worldwide, won 3 Brits and 2 Ivor Novellos, and presumably answered their own exhortation to let's make lots of money. I really will stop saying song names now. The Pet Shop Boys' artistic sensibilities, though, are more significant than their sales. The wise, witty, languorous lyrics of Neil Tennant and the unmistakable synthesizer sound of Chris Lowe. And they're still at it with the new album called Hotspot, the final record of 3 made in collaboration with the acclaimed producer Stuart Price. All their albums are one-word titles, by the way. We got into all sorts about their characters and methods, but began with the sound of this, their 14th album.
It was recorded in Berlin, so it's got, we think, quite a different sound. We recorded it in Hansa Studios in the centre of Berlin, where famously David Bowie and Iggy Pop worked, and we used a lot of old analogue gear. So our previous releases have been very shiny, hyper dance pop, and this one has got a very shadowy picture of us on the front cover, because that's what it sounds like.
Do you think people will be able to hear that difference in approach and equipment?
It's difficult to know, because I think we've always thought no matter what we do, if we made a reggae album in Kingston, Jamaica, people would say, yeah, typical Pet Shop Boys.
I mentioned this is the third album you made with Stuart Price, Electric in 2013, Super in 2016. What did you get out of that collaboration? What effect has he had on your music?
Well, although Pet Shop Boys are well known for being a synth duo, the reality is that if you look at the first 11 albums, they're littered with acoustic guitars, orchestras, real instruments. With Stuart, for the first time, we decided to be electronic purists. And that's because Stuart is a very brilliant electronic musician and producer. And also it's kind of what we came out of and what we've always liked, you know, a clattering sequencer line, and which is what this album pretty much starts with.
Are you a bit narky, Neil, that there's a sort of perceived wisdom about the Pet Shop Boys that you're always constantly having to play against? You know, you're a synth duo, Chris doesn't do anything, it's sort of very straightforward electro synth pop. Is there a little niggle there for you?
Yeah, only a little one. Well, only because I'm used to the niggle.
Yeah.
Always being there. Like people thinking everything's ironic or camp. It's sort of a lazy thing, really, I think.
Do you think you're more complicated than you get the credit for?
I don't think we actually want to appear to be complicated, because what we try to do is something that's quite direct, and that's why we had a lot of pop hits.
You've got me all wrong. I'm not that guy.
And something like Bird in the Heather, the lyrics kind of imply that you don't want to be pigeonholed too much. You want to be seen as elusive. Is that fair?
Yes, although I'm not really being me in Burning the Heather. I've taken the landscape from where I used to live. I lived 20 years in County Durham, and one day I was driving over the moors. It was autumn, they were burning the heather, and it was a lovely day, and I thought of that line and wrote a sort of poem, then sent it to Chris, and he said it's music.
Autumn is here, and they're burning the heather.
The rest of it is a sort of short story about a guy who's walked away from his life. You do see people who've gone there to get away from everything. You know, it's like the people who go and live in some remote part of New Zealand.
Yeah. Could you be a recluse, Chris?
Well, I'm trying all the time.
Yeah. It's just Neil's just dragging you back. Tell me about your musical influence at the minute then, Chris. What are you listening to? What impacts you when you're writing music and thinking about music?
Well, I think it's really sad to say, but I don't really listen to much music at the moment. I don't know where it really comes from, because obviously there's all the stuff from behind us. Those influences always come to the surface when we're in the studio. But we don't sort of jump
your own music.
Well, no, but music that we've liked,
Like what?
David Bowie through to Bobby Orlando, through to Patrick Cowley, all the Italo disco, all of that stuff is all there in the DNA of the Pet Shop Boys. That just surfaces all the time.
You mentioned the lyrics. Neil, your collected lyrics were published by Faber and Faber as 100 lyrics in a poem, praised by the TLS, no less, as brimming with charming revelation. Are you a poet?
No. Actually, a lot of songwriters, lyric writers have said this, is that when you're writing lyrics, you're not writing them to be printed on the page. And also I admit in the introduction I wrote that when you're a lyric writer, if you're really truthful, the sound of the words is more important than the sense. You want the vowels really, probably, because they sing well. That's why when someone sets poems to music, they still sound literary because they haven't been written to sing.
But the poems, conversely, when you put it on the page, if you've chosen them well, which you did, they did have a certain literary, and you are quite a literary person. There are literary references throughout all this stuff.
Putting the book together, I was amazed. I hadn't really sat down and thought about it. How many lyrics I take the ideas from books I've read, and some of them are quite obscure historical things. There's a whole series of songs by us about Russian history. Beautiful.
But there's a tradition of that, particularly I think probably in the 70s and 80s, of pop stars who may have just been influenced by books and putting them in lyrics. The Jam did it quite a lot. Paul Weller's quite known for it as well.
Yes.
It's a kind of a public service. You're introducing people to who listen to your music to a whole sort of cultural range.
Oh, well, David Bowie and Brian Ferry in the early 70s were an education on a lot of levels because of my generation probably heard of Nietzsche because of the track at the end of Hunky Dory.
And someone said it's fabulous you're still around today. You both made such a little go a very long way. Yesterday, when I was mad.
Another lyric that I just want to ask you about, because you are ironic. There's lots of irony in what you do.
There is irony. Yes.
In the, yesterday when I was mad, and someone said it's fabulous you're still around today. You've both made such little go a very long way.
Someone did say that. The use of it, I guess, is ironic, isn't it? But it's truthful. Someone backstage in America said exactly that. And of course it was a sort of veiled insult, wasn't it?
You take it as a compliment, Chris. Do you accept that there's a certain minimalist quality to what you do? Are you aiming for that? Because you don't want to seem effortful, do you?
It's not really minimalist. If you think of the record like It's a Sin, it's hardly, or Let Alone Device, is hardly minimal.
No.
In fact, we actually like overproduction. One of the things, to return to your question about Stuart Price, we've done with Stuart is not overproduce everything. And it's a battle for Stuart to stop that, particularly with me. But I think making it look easy, which Chris in particular is very good at doing, people then accept it as something that requires very little effort. But it's simply not true. It's
been said that even though, when I say overt about it from the beginning, there's a kind of queer sensibility, it's probably called.
Well, that's what we call now.
Yeah. Is that fair? Do you mind that term?
I prefer queer sensibility to gay sensibility, because it has a sort of a link to the original meaning of the word queer, that it's sort of slightly mysterious and underground. Yeah. And when I first went out into the gay world, it was still like that, which is not anymore, because it's probably much healthier now, in some ways, not in others.
Do you still hang around that old arcade to see what luck will bring?
And the opening track on this album is very queer. I mean, it's a guy sitting on, essentially it's meant to be Christopher Isherwood.
Okay, there we go.
Sitting on...
A good literary reference.
Sitting on the U-Bahn in Berlin, and he sees a former lover. And Christopher Isherwood did come back to Berlin after the war, and he bumped into one of those guys he wrote about in Goodbye to Berlin, Rolf or someone. And so I'm just imagining that, but I've set it in the present.
You collaborated with Years and Years on Dreamland, one of the songs on the album. Artist 30 years younger than you. Do you get into something...
30? You think it's impossible?
No.
I'm barely 30 myself.
You're fooling yourself. Do you get something different? Do you like the sort of meld of sort of your experience and people with a different musical experience? Is that what you're looking for?
No, very much actually. On the last tour and on the next tour we're doing, we've got a little band of 3 musicians who are young. And they have such different attitudes than we do. They're sort of nice people. They all get on and they,
They're positive.
they're positive.
You guys are kind of positive.
Yeah, kind
Do you like being a bit Eeyore-ish?
Well, what do you think about that?
of. I don't know if you like it.
Yeah.
It's what you are. I don't know what liking comes
Are you
into
Pop's
it.
great Eeyores? Is that better than the synth pop duo, the Pet Shop
No,
Boys?
I'm not. But I mean, as Patsy Kensett said in 1988, Chris really is the Victor Meldrew of pop.
Did she say that?
You said you had a musical manifesto when you began your careers. We think dance music should have more honest emotions. Have you always been honest?
Yes, I think I've tried to be honest about what I think people really think. Sometimes I'll go with, the feel of it, what dance music's meant to be. And sometimes a lot of what I write will be a sort of social observation. That's our main interest, is to put something out there that feels euphoric but truthful. And then sometimes people say, you've got really sad lyrics. Well, that's truthful though as well. So it's trying to find a balance between pop euphoria and the truth of real life.
Neil Tennant and Chris Lowe, the Pet Shop Boys. I'm sure Chris needed a lie down after all that work in the interview. Their album Hotspot is released today.